Hello, everyone. Welcome to the legal environment of business. This is our first lesson here. So what we'll be doing throughout the semester is we will be working through this book in not any particular order. We'll be bouncing around. You can look at the syllabus and see where we are each week. So this week, we're going to be starting with chapter 1. And because this is such a large book and because we only have the time that we have in the semester, we are certainly not going to be able to get to everything within each chapter. So I'm going to pick and choose parts of the chapter that I think are really relevant and important, and we will bounce around that way. So we are going to start with chapter 1, a little bit of an introduction and legal foundations. So here we go. Let me get this moving. Here we go. So introduction to law. So law, this is why we are here to understand business law. So law, the definition given by your book is a body of rules of action or conduct prescribed by controlling authority and having legal binding force. So it is very important in the business environment to understand what are these rules? What do we need to understand that can control or should control our actions within the business environment? Because we want to make sure that we follow the law, that we have an understanding of the law. So as a business, so many things can come up, right? Issues regarding employees, property, liability that we could be faced with regarding, let's say, our customers or other people within the business environment. We are dealing with contract laws, right? There's a lot of contract issues that can come up within the business environment, and we need to understand these laws, right? They create duties, obligations, and rights that reflect accepted views of a given society. Very important to understand it. So the purposes of the law, right? Why do we need to understand this law? Super important, right? System of order, right? We need to know, okay, this is the order of conduct, of consequences that we need to understand, that we need to follow. We want to make it equal and just in our society, right? We all need to conform to these standards, and it's important that we understand them so that this can happen, right? A method for resolving disputes, right? So if there is a dispute, let's say one business is involved in a trademark infringement dispute with another business, right? We need a method. How do we resolve that? Is there a certain forum that we need to go to have this resolved? What are the laws that govern this trademark infringement issue so we know what to go to? So this method is important. Good faith and fair dealing among merchants, really important. And reliability, right? We need to have a sense of, okay, will our actions be legal? What's permitted here? What are the ramifications for doing these things so that there's some reliability in making our decisions as to what we want to do as a business? So these are just some terms here. You'll see a lot of terms as we move through. Obviously, we're not going to get to all of them. So legal terms, right? You might have heard of legalese, jargon, right? So it sounds like a different language sometimes that lawyers speak. So you're going to learn a bit of this language throughout the semester. And there's a really great law dictionary, the most popular, well-known one, Black's Law Dictionary, first published in 1891. It's continually updated as we get more of these legalese terms, but that's a great source to look for when you are in need of a definition. If you can't find it, if it's not in your book for whatever reason, or you just come across it in the work that you do. All right, so let's just be aware of, there are different types of attorneys who work in the business environment. The main two kind of formats are in-house counsel. So they are lawyers who work within a company. Okay, so let's say a company, Coca-Cola, would have their in-house counsel. Okay, so these are the lawyers who work specifically for Coca-Cola. That's their client, and that's all the work that they do, which is a lot of work, but it's just that one particular client. And then you have attorneys who are employed by law firms, right? So they can be business corporate attorneys. They can cover all different kinds of issues to assist businesses. So they may help with litigation, which is, court cases, things like that, right? Going to trial, filing motions, those kinds of things related to these issues. They may also be business, what's called transactional attorneys. They're drafting the contracts, they're negotiating deals with other companies and with other parties and things like that. So there's the attorneys employed by law firms, and then there's the in-house counsel, which are the attorneys who work specifically within the business. Other terms to be aware of, right? So we know attorneys are looking to seek favorable outcomes for their clients, right? So they want their clients to be in a favorable position. So when we are talking about a lawsuit, we have got two parties that we are thinking about. Plaintiff and defendant. All right. So I mentioned trademark infringement. Let's just say Coca-Cola, right? That in-house counsel for Coca-Cola is suing Pepsi for trademark infringement. This would be a huge suit, right? Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. So bringing the lawsuit alleging trademark infringement would be Coca-Cola, the plaintiff, right? Defendant, the party who is being sued, would be Pepsi in this particular case. You will see that come up quite regularly, excuse me, in this class. All right, so we also want to be aware that there are different places, sources where we can pull law from in the United States. Okay, so when we think, okay, there's this legal issue, breach of contract, it could be negligence, a slip and fall types of case. And don't be overwhelmed. We will get into the nitty gritty of all of these topics through the semester. But these are just different kinds of legal issues that could arise. And where do we look for the law? There are these different kind of buckets of sources of law, right? And here are the four listed here. Let's go through them. Constitutional law. Okay, so when we think of the Constitution, we think of, okay, the Constitution protects individuals' liberty and freedom. It gives certain powers to the different branches of government. We've seen that, right? This government structure that has been created by the Constitution, right? We have state constitutions, we have federal constitutions. There are these enumerated powers that are given to the different branches of government. We also know that the founders created this concept of federalism, right? The federal and the state governments share power, right? We don't want this federal government that is too powerful. So we do have this way of dividing up the power, right? And we talked about, individual civil rights, procedural protections, and other things that are provided by the Constitution. All right, so the Constitution, as we said, it establishes the government structure, right? Three branches of government, we know them: executive, legislative, judicial. And think of the Constitution as this umbrella over all the US governing bodies, okay? And of course, it gives the states the remaining powers not specifically designated to the federal government bodies. And you'll see under these branches are just these kind of broad purposes of the different structures and kind of what they do of the different branches, right? Executive enforces the laws, legislative creates the laws, right? We're talking about state legislatures, we're talking about, Congress and the federal branch, and then we've got the judicial branch, which resolves disputes, interprets laws. Then we've got statutory law, right? And these are the written laws that are passed by the federal, right, by Congress or state legislatures, and they're either approved or rejected by the executive branch of government. As we know, I'm sure you remember this, right, how the executive branch has this veto power, and that's part of checks and balances, which we will get to, right? Ordinances is also considered statutory law. And they're more at the local level, these local ordinances. Okay, so municipal regulations, I'm sure you're familiar with, even if you didn't know that, we called them ordinances, but it could even be as simple as, what is your trash day? What are the zoning ordinances? If you want to build a business on your front yard, are you allowed to? Or is that area not zoned for commercial purposes based on your town's ordinances? Health and safety regulations, noise ordinances. So if you wanted to throw this big, huge bash party in your backyard, are you allowed to do that? Maybe, but is there any kind of noise ordinance that you need to be aware of? Can you have this live band at 1 a.m. playing? Probably not. You'd have to check your local ordinance. Okay, then we've got common law. So you might not have heard it being called common law, but certainly you're familiar with case law, right? The judicial branch, the court systems, they decide cases on a daily basis, right? And this is law that's made by the courts. It's called common law. It can also be called case law. So why do we need courts if we have this legislative branch that's coming out with these statutes and we have these ordinances? Well, many times courts have to fill in the gaps, right? They have to interpret the law and apply the law to certain factual situations. So we've got the judicial branch coming out with case law. They decide different cases. Their decisions are considered their holdings. Some decisions are published decisions, and you can take a look at them. Supreme Court decisions, they're published on a regular basis. Some state decisions. So we have got this branch that is interpreting the laws, right? So courts are a check and balance on legislative and executive branches of government, and we will see that all three of the branches they exercise this checks and balance function in some way. So we have this video here, and I want to just show you this, and you will.
In order to ensure that no one branch becomes more powerful than the other, a system of checks and balances was incorporated into the Constitution. In other words, each branch of government would be able to check the powers of the other. Take, for example, the process of passing a law. A bill must be passed through both houses of Congress before it goes to the President for approval. The President can either sign the bill or veto the bill. Even if the bill is vetoed, Congress may overturn the veto with a 2/3 majority vote. The Supreme Court has the final say because it can decide if a law is constitutional or unconstitutional. In the framework of the Constitution, there are many powers issued to each branch of government. In order to keep these powers from growing too strong and allowing one branch to overpower the others, there are many other ways that one branch can check the power of another. Consider the following examples. The President has the power to order troops to fight, but only Congress can formally declare war. So, without Congress's support, the President cannot maintain a war even though the President is the commander-in-chief of the military. The President makes judicial appointments, but these must be confirmed by the Senate before they can be made judges. The President can issue an executive order, but the judicial branch can find it unconstitutional and overturn the order. Supreme Court justices are appointed for life, but they can be impeached by Congress or removed from office. The court system can imprison a citizen. However, the President can pardon the individual and set the individual free. This system of checks and balances gives each branch of government a voice in the country's affairs. If one branch ever tries to overstep its boundaries, there is always a check in place for one of the other two branches to pull the one branch back into a balance of power.
Okay, so I think that video is helpful because it does give some examples of just how these checks and balances work. Okay, so here are some other just examples of the different branches of government and the powers that they have and how those powers can be checked by the other branches of government. So you can get a sense of that. Another thing to be aware of, as we go through this class, you'll learn about a lot of different legal principles, and you'll learn about case decisions in the business law context, and be aware of these terms stare decisis and precedent. Right? So stare decisis is this principle that cases with similar facts and issues should have the same judicial outcomes. So, we had talked about the law and the importance of there being this predictability, right? So in the business context, when you're making certain decisions, you want to make them based on principles that have occurred, similar cases, and having this idea or this predictability of how the outcome would be for you. So your book gives you this example on page 12, and it has to do with this business manager who is in charge of assisting with this acquisition of business assets from another business. And in making these determinations in assessing what should be done and the steps that should be taken, the tax ramifications for this business is really, really important. So, looking at stare decisis, looking at precedent, this business manager has this sense, this knowledge of how the IRS has treated similar transactions in the past, and that helps dictate how the business manager will structure this transaction. So there is this level of predictability. So that's really, really important. Now, precedent we talk about when we talk about appellate courts that have decided cases, right? So if the Supreme Court has made a decision on a particular issue, then the lower courts have a sense of how the ruling will take place in their case, right? So there is this precedent how an appellate court rules in in that jurisdiction is important because it creates this precedent, it creates this predictability, and we have a sense of how the lower courts will likely rule in substantially similar circumstances. And of course, as lawyers, we need to differentiate many times our case from a case that has been decided because sometimes we don't believe that the decision in the prior case would apply in the same way in our case. So sometimes we do need to differentiate that, right? So precedent, stare decisis, right? So there are these drawbacks, right? So as technology evolves, as the world changes, right? Sometimes precedents don't work, right? Because when a decision was made, things were different. Technology was different. People were different. The world was different. The way that we functioned was different. So many times there are changes that are made, but this takes place after a while and when there are these major technological and societal changes. Administrative law, be aware of this. We know that the administrative law comes out of these administrative agencies, right, that fall under the executive branch of government. And there are different administrative agencies, and we can look at a list of those agencies. Here are just some examples at the bottom: the Federal Trade Commission, right, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Centers for Disease Control. And these agencies exercise as sort of the experts in that particular area, right? And we hope that the head of these agencies really are experts within those particular areas so that they, when they are a part of this authority and these decision making processes, that they understand what needs to go into these administrative regulations. And courts typically defer to these administrative agencies involving how and when they enforce these regulations. All right, so types of laws that impact businesses. Don't be too concerned with all of these types of laws on the left side right now. We, as we work through the semester, will be hitting most of these types of law, and you'll see where these laws are typically found, right? So, for example, we will talk about torts in the next couple of weeks, and negligence is a type of tort. And where do we find laws that have to do with negligence? Typically, in statutes, right, under the legislative branch, and in common law under the judicial branch. And primarily they fall within state law, but we will also talk about the difference between state law and federal law and different jurisdictions. So this just shows you kind of the types of law, where that law typically comes from. Okay, be aware in this class in particular, it's important, is what's called this UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. And the Uniform Commercial Code governs commercial transactions, which is definitely relevant to what we're doing in this class. This code was drafted by legal experts, the National Conference of Commissioners of Uniform State Law. That was the group of these legal experts for the purpose of establishing uniform standards in the areas of law. So this group of these legal experts, they came up with this code, and this code is very heavily relied upon. In fact, of all 50 states, every single one of them, of the states, adopt the UCC in whole or in part. Most of them adopt it in whole, right? And it provides this set of rules and principles for businesses, business transactions. And again, it's to increase the reliability and the predictability in business transactions, right? Article 2 of the UCC, we will see as we go through the course, governs contracts for the sale of goods. So we will look at Article 2 when we do talk about the sale of goods. Other thing just to be aware of in this class, we will be talking about criminal laws. We will also be talking much about civil laws. So understand the difference. Civil laws are designed to compensate parties, including businesses, for losses from another's conduct, right? So that could be another person, it could be another business, right? So there's some kind of conduct and someone else was injured by this other person or party's conduct. So that could be, as we said, negligence, right? Let's say a business leaves a banana peel on the floor in the grocery store that this business owns, right? Someone slips and falls, right? This is a negligence action and it's a civil law that has allegedly been violated, right? Breach of contract, right? When we have a contract between two businesses, one party says that the other party breached, that they did not fulfill their obligation under the contract. That falls under civil law, right? Then we've got criminal laws. So these criminal statutes are designed to protect society as a whole. And the violation of these laws result in penalties to the violators, fines, imprisonment. So we're talking about examples. We will talk about white collar crimes like insider trading, talk about those, right? There are criminal statutes designed to protect society from this particular type of trading, insider trading. Burglary, right? You've heard about larceny, right? So these are different from civil laws. So criminal cases, as opposed to civil cases, are brought by the prosecutor. So it could be the U.S. Attorney's Office, it could be a state prosecutor, whereas civil cases are brought by individuals, it could be brought by a group of individuals, it could be brought by a business, and many times the plaintiff in those cases are represented by attorneys.